of the Novaks had immigrated through the port of Galveston and had settled in Praha, which was near LaGrange. It was a big Czech community. And then they moved to Shiner, where they were mainly farmers. What I know about my grandfather is that his father, Joe Lee Peterek, lived in a little community called Dilworth, which was between Shiner and Gonzales. And evidently he was, maybe he had a grocery store there or some type of merchandise store. But then he moved to Gonzales. And at that time, on one of like the gravestone or tombstones that I read, that he moved his father, John, and his wife to Gonzales, and they lived in a little garage apartment next to the house that they were in Gonzales, where he would soon open up a grocery store. My mom grew up in Shiner, and the house that she lived in was adjacent to my grandmother's house, Babitchka's house. Babitchka lived with another, family member, and I know that my mom's life was difficult because her mother died, I think in 1939, so she was roughly 16 or 17 years old. She had to care for her brothers and sisters, and she would even have a job at the nickel and dime store, and she'd come home and her younger brother would request the money so that he could go out and party on Saturday night. That was a common known. And my grandfather, who at that time was a bank clerk, teller at a bank in Shiner. That was Dedosh. That was his name.
And then Dad's boyhood?
I really don't know much about his boyhood. I'm being very specific. He came from a family of 6 children. There were 3 girls, 3 boys, and none of them are living, currently.
Do you know how Mom and Dad met?
I think it was like weekend dances. I think that's the way they met, and I think my mother said that Willie, my father, always had real classy cars. One of my younger sons recently had gone hunting, and he came across one of my younger friends in Gonzales who lived across the street. And he said, all I could remember about Willie was he'd have those Cadillacs lined up right there in front of the house. Father at that time was in the military. He was stationed in a Camp Wallace, which was in Hitchcock, Texas. They lived on the island. Mother was just pregnant, And soon after I was born, he was shipped overseas to Marseille, France, and was in France. So when I was born, I was in Galveston for a while, but then she moved back to Shiner, where Mother lived in Galveston. Happened to be just a half a block of a little cafe that we would frequent called Sonny's. We didn't know this until I went back and, Mother said we lived on 1814L, and we went back and still there was a high-rise house that was there. I did comment about the doctor that delivered me was E. Sinks McClarty. And later when I was in medical school, he was a mentor for people that were interested in going into general practice. So I got to know him very well. Also, my name is William Henry Peterek. And so when they went to baptize, Catholics like to baptize their children very early in life. My mother says, well, I have William picked out for him. He says, well, why don't you use my name, Henry Borcher. He was a priest at St. Mary's Cathedral. That's how I got the name William Henry. And later in life, Terry and I got married at St. Mary's Cathedral.
So you're a little bitty tyke. You're a couple months old maybe. Dad's serving, and mom uproots and says, I'm going home, basically, it sounds like. Where did she move y'all to?
Shiner, and where my grandfather's house was adjacent to his in-laws' house, and there were 2 houses there. And the big joke about when I remember there, and I have this distinct memory, was when I was about 2 years old, she would give me breakfast, but I knew if I walked next door to Babitchka's house, that she would give me that real milky, sugary coffee and sweetbread, and we would machi. And they spoke a lot of broken English. They spoke a lot of Czech, which Czech I never caught on to. When we moved from Shiner, my dad returned and he was going to go into the grocery business. We rented a section of a big house in Gonzales. And I can remember it being cold. And I can remember mother putting caps over her head so the bats wouldn't get in her hair. And there were mice in the thing. But shortly after that, we moved to another rented house called that was rented from Lynn Smith. He had the movie theater there. And it was a beautiful house, had a big oak tree out in front. And that's where myself, Alan, Janet, my sister, the third child, and then my third brother, Gregory, grew up. And I knew that I stayed there till I was 6 or 7 years old, because I went to the first grade at an elementary school that was not the main elementary school that I went to. It seems like with the advance to that nice house, that I guess his business prospered, and that's why it was a delightful house to live in. There were a lot of neighborhood children. We would go and each other's house, and that's where we'd play. I can remember, the slip and slides. I don't think we used slip and slide. We used the grass and water, and we'd slide in our backyard. And another funny event was on Sundays in that neighborhood, there was a house that had rooster fights, cockfights. I was just amazed to see them put those spurs on the heels of the roosters, and those roosters would fight till one of them died. By that time, my grandpa Joe Lee had moved into a house that was very near my father's grocery store. So I was around Joe Lee, Neffy, and their children. My father had the grocery store, but my aunt, her would be Juanita or baby Peterek Davis, and John Davis lived now in a garage apartment where my great-grandparents lived. And they worked in the store. My Juanita or baby was a cashier, and Uncle John was a butcher in the place. It was Peterek's grocery store. And it was about a half a block off of a square. The square was sort of a central locale where people would come on and park their cars, and then they would go to all of the other merchandise locations. The grocery stores at that time were probably about the size of a 7-Eleven, or it was probably bigger. But in those grocery stores, there were certain things that you didn't see. Vinegar came in 50-gallon barrels, and people would bring a gallon, and you'd pump a jug of vinegar. Flour was sold in 25-pound sacks. Pinto beans came as in a big 50 or 100-pound sack, and you would actually bag them in little paper bags and sell them as 2 pounds or 5 pounds of pinto beans. We had produce, and the produce would be brought by Mr. Mosquita from San Antonio, where he'd go to the markets there, bring it in his truck. My dad would buy the lettuce, tomatoes, any items that he needed, for his produce. we received our groceries from a warehouse in Victoria called Gross Worden. They were suppliers from a grocery store, and every Wednesday we'd get a big old truck that would back up to our back, and then we'd unload these cases of merchandise. You know, I think I got gratification from cleaning the stores. We put this sawdust, oiled or waxed material, and it would sort of shine the floor as you would sweep the floors, and you do that every evening. I did like interacting with the people that worked there, and I got to meet a lot of very interesting people. They were usually parents of kids that I was going to school with, you know. Interestingly, there was a doctor that lived across the street from my grandfather that had delivered my mother, my aunt, all of the people. And then the hospital was just right up the street. They're the Wagners, and the Wagners had a big supply of doctors. The father had sons, and 3 of them were doctors, and then those sons have sons that are doctors, and that even one of the Dr. Wagners is in College Station practicing. So,
to this day?
Till this, yeah. But this would be like the great-grandson of Dr. Wagner that was there in Shiner. Because there was so much family there, we would go visit my mother's aunts, and in a particular location. That's when I lived in Shiner. Shiner was a sort of a neat community. And there were also cousins that I would play with. The house next to me had a Victor Novak that was a cousin of mine, and we interacted. My grandfather would take me on rides in the old sort of older Model A or Model T that he would also drive back and forth to Gonzales, and sometimes he'd bring me back to Shiner, and I'd spend the night with him there.
What were your parents' parenting style like?
My mom was a very gentle person, but she had recognized when there were times that we need to be disciplined. And when my father came home, we'd get paddled. My father operated a grocery store from 7 to 7, so he really didn't get home till later. And then at that time, you know, my mother would prepare or either have something prepared for him to eat at that time. But I would say that by far my father was strict. He didn't put up with any nonsense. He was still paddling me when I got into high school. When I'd get in trouble in high school, I'd get either a belt. I would get a belt to that. But I do remember Mother getting switches, getting these green sticks, limbs off of trees and paddling us when we had done something. I can't recall the events that we got the paddling for, but they were severe enough for her to want to switch us down the back part of our thighs, you know. Probably as when I approached my 12, 13 years of age, my father was a person I really didn't want to be like. He drank too much. He gambled above his means, and I know there was some womanizing in life, and it really was a distracting time. But Mother would just, you know, put up and tolerate with it. I can remember, like, he would always drink, maybe come home even later as my years got up, and there would be some arguments. And I know that when I was a teenager, I was battling with him physically. I had him pinned to a floor in our hallway one time, you know, and I'm just being honest, you know, I didn't want to hurt him. He was drunk. And it was one time when he got so belligerent that Mother put us all in a 1954 Ford station wagon, and we went and spent the night out and a road behind my aunt's house just to get around, let him sober up. Another story I'll tell you is that, talk about his gambling. One time he would go shoot craps, and it was in a little community 14 miles away called Hoheim, and they would shoot for lots of money. One night he came home with $2,900. He always felt lucky around his birthday of November 8th, so he'd make sure to shoot craps there. And so it was near Christmas time, and my mother wanted to go shopping in San Antonio. So he went out and said, Stella, I'm going to go buy you a new Ford tomorrow with this money. You need to go shopping. And so he did do that. But I can tell you about 6 or 8 weeks later, he came home crying. He had lost $3,400. He was going to have to go borrow money. It was, he said, and I don't know how I'm going to pay for my son's education. I mean, he lost his tail off. I mean, that $3,400 in shooting for $100 craps, that was something. And believe me, I love to gamble. I've bet on football games. I'd go to bookie joints in Galveston. I'd have a bankroll, and when it's gone, it's gone, And then as he saw me further advance, he let me run his store. I mean, he would take my mother and my younger siblings, and they would go on little vacations. And there, I had the key stores. I'd open up in the morning. I'd make sure that I counted and opened up, put a set amount of cash in the cash registers, and then check it out at night. At night, we'd take the cash money out and leave the cash register drawers open, and we'd go put the money in the produce in the cold section of that's where our bank was, or a safe was for the night. I guess he learned his lesson, because he got robbed a couple of times where people actually came in, took a screwdriver, got in, and took his cash. But no, he gave me a lot of that showed a lot of trust in me. Gave me a lot of independence, confidence. Mother was always, sort of the rock. My wife prods me because I was the firstborn, and I got different privileges. And when I was growing up, I got to take dance lessons, and I got to take oratory lessons, because either she saw something in me, or either it was a matter of Czech heritage where you sort of formalized people. But she did that for me. And then as really a family, my father figure, Uncle Ed, who was my mother's oldest brother, Edwin Novak. He was in the service, and I remember pictures of him riding a horse. So I guess he was in the Army, and I think he was in more like Japan area on that horse. Well, when he came back, he got his first degree at Southwest Texas, or Texas State University, and he became a teacher and coach at Yoakum High School. In Yoakum, his team went 0-9, and I think he found the writing on the wall that was not his future. So it was very intelligent. So he went back to the University of Texas in the early 50s and got his PhD. During the time he was at Texas, I was invited to come up and stay with him. He would invite my dedosh, and I would go up there. My grandfather and him would go up there, and he was at first a dorm master for the athletes, and so I'd get to see all of the University of Texas athletes. There was two All-Americans, Tom Stolhansky and Bud McFadden, that were very prominent people that I got to meet when, I was 8, 9, or 10 years old. And then he moved to an apartment, and he would always take me to the drag, which was the main Guadalupe Street right next to it. And he bought me my first sport coat. He always dressed real nice, and he would really take care of me. I think he even bought me a set of golf clubs. He liked to play golf, and so I played golf with him.
Do you think he saw some lacking from your dad and was trying to fill in some shoes, or was he just a good dude?
Well, I think probably my mother had mentioned it to him, but that topic never came up. Soon after he finished his PhD, I don't really know what his PhD was in, but he went to work for the Rand Corporation, which was in Santa Monica, California. And he wouldn't talk very much about it, but my son-in-law told me that the Rand Corporation was like a think tank, and they really hired people that were brilliant, that could maybe foresee what was going to be needed. But he again, and when he was out in Santa Monica when I was 13 years old, my grandfather and I rode the train from San Antonio to Los Angeles, and I was out there for 2 weeks. Got to see Disney World. Went to all of the major Hollywood attractions, and my father was wrapped up with Lawrence Welk. Lawrence Welk had his entertainment at the Argonne Ballroom. Well, they said, we're going to go try to go to the Argonne Ball. And they sort of put a little darkness underneath my nose. And so we get in line at the Argonne. There's a big line to go in. And they said, who are you trying to fool? They said, he can't come in. So we didn't get to go to the Argonne Ballroom. But, my uncle's apartment was at a very scenic place. It was on the Pacific Palisades, which was the overlook to the Pacific Ocean. So in the morning, I was there in August, you walk across the street, it's cool, and you could see the Pacific Ocean. It was beautiful. We did quite a few things. He made sure that I learned how to eat vegetables. It wasn't just meat and potatoes and gravy, the way we would eat at home. And then after he left the Rand Corporation and became a professor at Ohio State University. There was a title, but something like applied math and computers that he was involved in. But he met a stewardess and married her and had three sons, and that lived. One of them still lives in Columbus. The other two have passed away.
Very briefly, you said Mom had did dance and oratory classes. What was that like in the 50s for what?
Well, I still remember that. And I still think my dance lessons is when my wife married me. I mean, Moochie Turk was the lady that gave both the dance lessons and oratory. But with these dance lessons, there were about 8 or 10 males and 8 or 10 females. And each time we'd come, we had to have a dance card. And we would have to go ask each of the 8 or 10 individuals to dance. Girls would sit on one side, the boys sit on the other, and then we'd go ask them, and we'd learn to grab their and then dance. It was comical, but we learned to do the twist. We learned to do the foxtrot. We learned all kind of dance. It gave you confidence. It's like, who's going to be the first person on the dance floor? When we started going to dances, Terry and I would be the first one, whether either it's a nightclub or at a wedding. There was no shyness to dancing. And then the oratory classes, where you just were given material from famous people to read, either writers or presidents or whatever, and then they would have a recital, and it was mean speaking, and it was pretty much you memorized the speech, and so that's what I did. Both of those instances sort of made me more formal, you know. I knew how to maybe present myself, and gave me a lot of confidence. My recall of, say, the elementary school is that maybe I really didn't commit to being, you know, a good student at that time. Even though I think I'd made A's and B's, I don't recall any spectacular teachers. No teachers that in grade school that were instrumental to me. I know that at one time I got caught cheating on a spelling test by my 6th grade teacher, Ms. Gashidel, that really humiliated me, you know. And but I don't know whether I had forgot to study the words or it was a rough night at home, you know. And that, but I had to have the book by my leg. She came up, and so I got to go to the cloakroom. That is a room where you bring and put your coats and stuff before you go into the classroom. It's called the cloakroom. And the 6th grade, it wasn't going from room to room. It was one teacher teaching all of the courses. I know that, you know, perhaps when I went to junior high school, I started, and you have to understand, I was going to work before I went to school, and then there's school, and then I went to the grocery store after school. I almost looked as like school as a job, you know, where I was just going but as I approached my, I guess, junior high and high school, I knew that I wanted to achieve. I think the grades became more instrumental to me. I can remember my mom reading with me because I was a very poor reader. And that was only the help I needed. I never needed any help with my math side. I was always just gifted in that area. I got the mumps when I was about in the sophomore year, and I lost about 15 pounds, and it was very hard. I think that was also instrumental in sort of slowing down my pace of life. I didn't have to work. And then I get to my junior year, and I guess I was carrying on one time, like outside the room. I got a pass to go to the bathroom, and I was carrying, and my history teacher came out, and she says, "Billy, what are you doing? You know, why are you goofy?" Said, "If you would just settle down, you'll amount to something." Those were very powerful words. And next year was my senior year, and I was prepared. I made all A's. And the way I do it, especially like in history, I do the assignments I'd have would be necessary for my classes. And on Sundays, which was my day to really get caught up, I'd do the whole week's work so that I wouldn't individually have to do it at night. And those were, I really appreciate what she said. You know, she did other things. She took our whole senior class. She was a big Texas historian, and we lived in Gonzales, which was very instrumental in Texas history. I think I don't know if she took us to the Alamo, but she did take us to Goliad. And then we came back through Seguin because of significance of Juan Seguin. And then in Gonzales, there is a Sam Houston Oak. That's where our field trip ended. But she knew her history, and we learned our history. And still to this date, when Terry and I travel, we will, try to see the historical areas as well as the libraries in each community that we go to.
You had I believe it was a coach and health teacher. Tell me this.
Eddie Burris. I was involved in basketball and baseball. I always term myself as not strong, not being able to compete with my speed. I wasn't speed, so I was able to play basketball, and I was made the A team my senior year and was a backup, and then played on the varsity baseball team my senior year. Well, he was a coach during that time. He just was solid. He was fun, and he would give you the compliments at the right time, and he would correct you at the right time. But our basketball team was 6-2, and we got beat by Lockhart twice. But there was a game that we weren't supposed to win that we won. So we would bring our after game meal with us, which turned out to be either sandwiches or summer sausage with cheese and crackers. So he was so excited. One night he came on and he said, "Hey boys, y'all have any leftover mule dick?" That was the term that he knew we were talking because we'd pass back and forth the mule dick, and it was comical to think a coach did that. Another instance was, and I'll get choked up about this, is it in practicing for our game against Lockhart. Lockhart had the round backboards as opposed to the square backboards. So he took us over to Shiner where we practiced to have that. And on the way back, we stopped at the Dairy Queen, and he got us all a hamburger. But the next morning, he went to my father and said, "I took all those boys over there and gave him a hamburger, and your son was the only one that said thank you." And that's very meaningful to be complimented. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Well, I kept in touch with him until he was in his 80s. I think he passed away, but he was a real superior guy, and just by chance, he was a baseball player at University of Texas when my uncle Ed was up there as a dorm master, and so they knew each other.
What was Friday night like in Gonzales or where you grew up? What would you guys do?
Football was the name of the game. Gonzales was in a district with communities that were close. Luling, Lockhart, Yoakum, Hallettsville, and that was it. I didn't play football. I was in band for a couple of years. I played the clarinet. That's what the town was centered around, and not only the football games and its competition, but even the bands. I loved to watch the music that would be put out and played at halftime. And I think, these are teenagers playing music and marching. It was a great time. Saturday nights came. That was dance night. There were two bands, the Traits. Roy Head was head of that group. And then there were the Moods. Roy Head was primarily out of San Marcos, and the moods were out of Luling, and there would always be primarily the moods playing at either Yoakum, Turner Hall. Hallettsville had either American Legion Hall. There would be dances at Gonzales, but primarily Yoakum and Hallettsville where they had, and gosh, there would be over 1,000 people that would come to those dance, and there wasn't air conditioning. And I mean, they played good, solid music. And that band, the Moods, continued to do until maybe a few years ago they disbanded. And
Roy's a legend.
Huh?
Roy Head is a legend.
Yeah, T. Wright, Treat Her Right. That was his song that really made him popular. And
then he turned into friends with Elvis, and dude's got lots of stories.
Right.
So did you grow up listening to Chubby Checker and Fats Domino and Elvis and all that stuff?
Yeah, it was. I can remember Elvis and Johnny Cash, and they're actually the radio station in Gonzales, KCTI, were promoting a fundraiser, and it was by donating money. As it grew, would determine whether Elvis or Johnny Cash was the favorite. And I really think that Johnny Cash ended up winning that, winning that thing.
Did you learn to drive early?
Yeah. In fact, I think sometimes our parents let us drive illegal because I could remember, okay, we had a 1956 Ford station wagon, and I think you had to got your license at 16. And I don't know who taught me how to drive and parallel park and stuff like that, but my parents would let me drive with my cousins to my uncle's farm in Shiner. And then we were stupid. We would chase rabbits with BB guns. We'd go through the fields and try to shoot rabbits with BB guns. And one time, my brother was shot in the toe by his cousin when the rabbit ran underneath the car. But we'd go there, we'd spend the night. There would be occasional Shiner beer in the refrigerator that we'd drink. And then we took, each night about 4 o'clock in the morning, the train would come. And we'd go put coins in between the cracks to try to run them off the tracks. So
you end up with your flat coins.
Yeah, I ended up flat coins, yeah.
Did you have a good idea that you were going to be going to college?
Oh, yes. I mean, I had no inclination to stay in Gonzales and operate a grocery store. And I think that sort of like, in the people had wine things in Italy, it'd always be the firstborn who would be the next in line to be the wine master or whatever. I wasn't going to do that. Friends of mine were also talking about it at that time. I had a friend, Herbie Pounds, that was going to A&M, and Lawrence Kunchik, and several of them. So there were different things that your counselor would talk to you about going to college. I knew that starting in the fall of my senior year that college was was a future for me, and I knew that I was good in math, so I sort of started on a path that I was going to go into pharmacy. I got a scholarship to go to St. Edward's University. It was a Catholic university in Austin, and I'm very thankful for my time there in terms of the discipline. I mean, the lights went out in our dorms at 11 o'clock. There were several brothers that were over the university at that time, and the math, the English, and were very good foundation. And at that time, I made, pretty much all A's, maybe a B. And my uncle doc approached me about saying, you're making good grades. You should consider, pre-med. After I found out that in this pharmacy school that it was not going to transfer some of my credits, it sort of put me behind after 1 year. I went into the pre-med program. I think a combination of my uncle being a dentist there in Shiner and his interaction with the Wagners, and that was a nice profession. And really at that time I was very interested in wanting to profession that I could really provide for a family, and I whether it's pharmacy or medicine, I think just the notoriety of being a doctor gave me something that interested me.
Any stories? Because you're talking about you're at St. Edward's. You're there for 4 years, right?
No, I was there 1 year, and then when my credits were going to transfer to Texas for my pharmacy school, that's when I made the change. I said, I'm not going to be. I can't stay at St. Edward's and get on the pathway of being a pharmacy unless I'm in. So I got there and was going to be pre-pharmacy, but then I changed to pre-med at that time.
And you changed schools?
Yeah, I changed school. I went to University of Texas starting in the fall of about 1962. And there were interesting things that went on. In 1963, they had a national champion football team, and Darrell Royal was there. But the other thing was that really brings to my recollection was Kennedy's assassination. It was a Friday, November 22nd. And I mean, that campus just literally got quiet, when it was heard, because it was about mid or late morning when he was assassinated. And by that time it had already got there. And another thing that had happened at the time, I was not on the campus or going to classes because it was summer, was that Charles Whitman had the tower shooting at the time. I mean, there were a lot of things that went on. I was on Guadalupe at 26, the A-Bar Hotel. It was a bar. It was built by the Ainsworth, who were from Gonzales. I didn't know that, but that's where I roomed at Texas. It was on Guadalupe, and then Guadalupe sort of curved off. There was a Sumburger that I ate at a lot, and then there was Orange Bull. Was another little thing where you could get a plate meal for lunchtime and stuff. And then I ate at the boarding houses. They had boarding houses where you could pay a fee for the month and eat there. There was a fraternity house right there on 26th in Guadalupe, big old white house. It was one that pretty high up on the echelon. And then the Tri-Delts were down one street behind Guadalupe, about 27th Street. But one of my suite mates was Danny Stallings. And the Secret Service came to my room and wanted to know about Danny Stallings. Well, Lyndon Johnson had a daughter that was a Tri-Delt, and my suite mate was really involved, I guess, with him being president, and he started writing her notes or something like that, and they came and checked him out. One of my suite mates was Royce Lamberth, who, after Texas, went to law school and became a JAG, military, and he prosecuted the Bill Clinton, Monica Lewinsky case, or trials or whatever. And then Danny Stallings, he became known as the Popcorn Man. He had a popcorn stand in a big, prominent building in Dallas. And the reason why I know this is that my roommate at that time, Roland Foster, was an attorney, I think, in that building. And he said, "You don't know, Danny sold his popcorn business for a great amount of money. Roland asked me to be in his wedding, which was in Anson, Texas, and I drove up for that. And there were a lot of things about Anson. Anson was dry. I think Abilene was dry. I forget what Anson. No, I forget the saying what the saying was, but it was dry. If you wanted for his wedding, we'd have to go to Impact. There's a little town called Impact where you would buy your liquor and take it to Anson. I made sure that I would keep my grades up, and so for things like English and history, one summer I went and got my English and history credits at Southwest Texas, which, I got A's and B's, which added to my grade point average that I would not have got at Texas. But I would choose to take classes where I knew that I would perform. I was very good at math, and I was good in accounting, and I took an accounting course that I know that I made an A in. I took marriage and a family, even though it was supposed to be an easy go. It was a very teaching the values of life. It was one that I really enjoyed going to. It's called Marriage and the Family. But I did study. Study was what I did, and I was always more of a morning person. I'd always get up and early and do my studies, and I wouldn't like to do those all-nighters, what they call. I never did that. I could not do that and function. I was on a intramural team called the Recruits, and we won the slow pitch against. It was in 1965. We won that, and I got to interact with a lot of great people. The boys that played on that team. The guy that put it together was Delbert Cox. He was from around Refugio, but the Recruits had a big base, and they were very prominent in intramurals, all facets of sports in there.
As a college student, and particularly pursuing an advanced degree, you got the Vietnam War getting ready to gear up.
As far as the Vietnam War, I guess its impact was I going to be drafted, at that particular time. That really didn't come into play until I was called for a physical to go when I was, I think I was an intern in 1970 at Brackenridge Hospital, where I had to go take a physical or to see, but I never was drafted. I took a physical, but never was drafted into the military at that time. I think where it impacted was my brother, who was younger than me. He was working for the electric cooperative in that area where he's a lineman, and he was going to be drafted. Instead of being drafted, he enlisted in the Navy, and he was stationed in Norfolk, Virginia, and I don't think he ever got involved in any military action or anything like that. The basis for admission to like medical school is your grade point average and the MedCat. My grades were 3.5 or higher, but my MedCat, I was like off the scales in math, but did very poorly in vocabulary. And I guess that was the first time I applied. I was unsuccessful. I mean, they just said, we'll let you know later. And finally they said, our class is filled. Well, I had to make a decision whether, because I couldn't afford just keep going to school, what I was going to do. And I said, I'm gonna give it one more round. I started back 65 fall. That was the fifth year of school at Texas. And they sent me back saying my name had been put on an alternate list.
For what school? For
the UTMB in Galveston. It was getting around spring of '66, hadn't heard, but there was an attorney in Gonzales, Mr. Miller, and he was very good friends with a Dr. C.T. Stone Sr. Dr. C.T. Stone was a well-recognized internal medicine doctor, and Mr. Miller would always go down there and get his physicals from Dr. Stone. I think my father had crossed paths with him. He said, "Look, I'm going down to see Charlie," and he said, "I'll ask him if he could put in a good word." Well, a couple of weeks later, I got an acceptance. She's done with school. She is now an RN, and she will work at John Seeley Hospital's preemie nursery. They take care of the premature kids. She made a lot of friends there at that preemie nursery. The lady who was her supervisor was Miss Fellis. She was just a sweetheart of a lady. And Terry really related well to a couple of the black nurses and the nurses' aides. And she said there was one of the nurses, Jean Jackson, who would just really try to embarrass the hell out of her. The way she would talk, and and knowing that she was a newlywed, but it was fun. And there was also a Filipino nurse, Miss Calapan, who worked with Terry on her shift, in the preemie nurses. And it was a challenging job. It was a lot of...
So was she essentially, because you still had school, she was the breadwinner for a while?
She was, but it was convenient for me. I got a good job, convenient, and it was teaching also. I did histories and physicals for the doctors that worked out of St. Mary's Hospital. And so they'd have to have a history and physical on the chart within 24. So after I'd leave class, I'd go and do histories and physicals for Dr. McClarty, for Dr. Projansky. I can remember all of them. And I'd get $5 for history and physical. And I might do, I'm sure, about 40 to 50 a month. And I can remember taking my bill to Dr. Projansky, and he was a little Jewish general doctor there. And he said, "Oh, Peterek, come back here, I'll pay you." He'd always pull out cash and give me cash. He says, "Peterek, when you're out in practice," he said, "I don't care whether they black, white, Mexican. If they got money, you take care of them, And then one thing I did remember from Dr. McClarty, I went out and ate with him. I said, "Well, how do you pick out a place that you want to practice?" And he says, "I'll give you 3 recommendations." He said, "First, make sure you like the churches. Second, make sure you like the schools. And the third thing is make sure there's a Jewish merchant that's in the community."
Where did you and Terry live when you first got married?
5324 Avenue P. It was a little apartment higher on the upper floor, and it was $55 a month. It was not the most convenient place to, because I'd have to get to medical school, but she was working, so we'd both ride, get there. Well, I'd be there a little bit early because usually our shift started like 7 o'clock in the morning. I had two years of being in medical school when we got married. We got married in August of '68 and had our first child in September of 1969. It was hard for her to go back to work after she had Jill, so it was 69. So we're going into 70. There weren't any openings at the preemie nursery. The only opening was at the Burns Hospital. And she worked there probably 3 or 4 days, said, "I'm not going to be able to do this." We had our daughter Jill, and so I said, "Well, I've already had some loans, but I couldn't apply for something real immediate." But So I knew of a wealthy man in Gonzales, and I asked him if I could borrow $1,000 just to finish out my school year. And I went to him on a Saturday and asked him, said, look, Mr. Lawley, his name was Pete Lawley, and he said he would loan me the money, and paid him back, and paid off all my other student loans that were that accumulated in medical school. Throughout the senior year, you were applying for internships. I applied for 2 or 3 of them, but really I wanted to probably stay in the state. So other people, wanted to go outside the state. So I got accepted at the Brackenridge Hospital, Austin, Texas, hospital, where I would be serving a rotating internship, which meant you'd be on surgery, you'd be on OB, you'd be on internal medicine, pediatrics, for a while. When I was a senior, the head of the pediatrics department did come to me, and he recognized some qualities in me, and he said, really, we want to offer you a position as a pediatric intern. I really had my mindset on being a family doctor, and I just liked being able to be associated with a larger age span of people. I liked the older people, I liked the younger people, but that is, quite of an age group to be responsible for. Back in those days, you didn't have to do a residency in family medicine. You could go out after your internship, and I really was more anxious about getting out and started establishing a good income coming in. The medical school was fun, it was rewarding. I got a wife, had 1 child, and then we moved to Austin. At Brackenridge Hospital, it's now called the University Hospital. It's right there on 15th and 35. I'm telling you, that was the ER was a very busy ER, and that's where I became a doctor. It was at Brackenridge. I recall the most from the emergency room, because that's where all the action was. But just for an intern, spending about 4 to 6 weeks on an OB rotation and delivering 66 babies, during that period of time. We didn't have the privilege of having anesthesia. So it was either going to be a spinal block, which we administered, or we would do local anesthesia. But the emergency room was where, it just required decision-making acutely. And you didn't have time to wishy-washy about it or what if, you just did it. The event that was the most instilling, and I still can recall it to this day, was I'm right out of medical school, okay, maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 months, and the EMS calls the Brackenridge ER, says we need a doctor, a nurse, and some pain medication. So we got an industrial site accident. So Brackenridge was on 15th, so we go up on 35 and turn off on Runberg Lane. And when I get out of the ambulance, there is a nurse that's in charge of our overall interns for the clinics. And she's out there. She's got her hands on her hips, and she hands me a hacksaw. And she says, you got to cut this guy's arm off. He said, he was in a ditch digger, and he had a blue jean jacket, and he got pulled in, and the fire department had already tried to reverse the gears and all of this stuff. And I said, lady, get you a real doctor. I was thinking like orthopedic or something. She says, no, we don't have the time to do that. So there was a nurse that, her name was Billy Shuley, and the other nurse was Lita Bryce. And we're up in this, pretty high raised piece of equipment. And Miss Shuley goes in on one side and gives this guy morphine in one. And I said, "Are you ready?" He said, "Sir, I've never been readier." He's alert and everything. And so it's like you just have to do it. So I remember the thing going through both the bones. I had put a tourniquet on. It really wasn't bleeding because usually when you have a crush injury, all the vessels shut down. And he steps out of that ditch digger into the back of the ambulance. Now, at that time I was so stunned, and you just think, there have been people who have cut their own extremities off when they're hiking or something like that. And it's just, you got to do it. You got to do it. It put a real backbone in me, like I could do anything. Breckenridge was very busy, but and a lot of it, was just pure trauma. But there were also instances that were so sad. Coming in on 71 from between Bastrop and Austin. I was there on the ER doctor for the night, and the ambulance said we're bringing in probably 6 DOAs, dead on arrival. And these were 6 co-eds, females. And you had to get on the phone and call each one of the families and say, you need to come. We've got some, they've been injured in bad accidents. And that was an event that stuck out in my mind. And then there was a college professor that had a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old son, and he shot both of them in the head. They brought him in. The 2-year-old survived, but it just makes your life think, what are these people thinking, But you recognize you're in a profession that's going to have to handle stuff like that. And, maybe it goes back to your grocery store days where, look, this is just the actions that you've got to take. All along, after that one event, I just felt like I could, handle anything. And if there was an emergency, I could do it. I can remember one night where my son comes home with a friend. They'd been in a fight, and he's got a big gash in his head. He'd been hit in the head by a tire tool. And they came home to our home and said, "Dad, you're going to have to stitch me up." Well, he had his friend too that had more of a minor cut that I stitched up first. And then then when I got to him, one of the things I learned at Breckenridge was from the neurosurgeon, says, whenever you have a laceration in the scalp, always clean up and go down into the wound. Well, his skull was cracked. And I said, "Terry, I'm not gonna be able to sew him up. He's got to go to the emergency room." And so he ended up having to have a neurosurgeon go in and lift the bone up. I used to do a lot of things for my kids and their kids' friends. I'd take them to my office and put stitches in them, mainly stitches that they needed. And I will tell you another very gory thing was a irate husband had found his wife cheating on him, and he stuck a treble hook up the urethra, the hole of the penis. And what had happened was it's sort of like, those cedar choppers, or you're from the low rent people. He had all of the urine was not able to get out, so it extravasated up his penis and up into his abdomen. Yeah. And then the amount of work.
So you were at
Breckenridge from June of 1970 to June of 1971.
But you worked the other things too, right?
Yeah, we had rotations. you're on call every third night, so you stayed at the hospital, and that was rough on my wife. In addition to that, we lost. She lost her father, and I lost my father in the same year. There was a sense of sadness, but there's also a sense of relief. He had got himself into bad high blood pressure problems and congestive heart failure, and he actually came up to Brackenridge, and I admitted him, and I had one of the cardiologists up there take a look at and straighten him out. But he didn't last, but a few weeks after he left there. But no, it was. I can tell you that it was a relief. But it was sort of a mess cleaning up the businesses that he was in. He had opened up first a little drive-in grocery store, restaurant, and a bar next to it, and then he was selling cars, and so there were so many loose ends, and he didn't leave my mother in a very good financial situation. You talk about Friday Night Lights. A very comical thing was, he was in the used car business. Well, Nixon and Smiley, there are two little towns that are near Gonzales. It was a big rivalry, and he bet his Edsel against somebody else for some money, and he ended up losing the Edsel.
After hearing about Brackenridge, I want to say, what was your next duty station? Where did you go from here?
Well, unwisely, I went right into practice. I think I probably would have benefited by doing what they call a family medicine rotation, that was just starting at that time. But I went to Alvin, Texas, and stayed there for about 3 months. And the reason I stayed there was when I came in, they put me to work very hard right off the bat. And I mean, I was seeing probably 30 patients a day, and I really, that was not going to be my style. And in addition to that, Alvin did not have an emergency room, and it was equipped with a doctor. You were on call, you had to go out there and tend to it. And then they also were delivering babies. That was something when I got to Galveston, I did not do any OB, because I really wanted to be in an office practice. That's what I wanted to do. You
wanted the relationship with the patients.
Oh gosh, yes.
But a family practice allows you to get to know these people.
When I left the practice, I missed a lot of relationships because they really were my friends. I had a lot of and if I'd go to Randall's or Garland's, the two grocery stores, oh gosh, I have this or have that, and but you're right. But I created a lot of relationships, and it wasn't just friends of mine, but with the Black community. I really developed a nice relationship with the Black community in Galveston, as well as I got a big following from Port Bolivar. One of my first patients was that I opened, when I opened it, the first day I had one from Bolivar that'd seen my ad in the paper.
Where did you open?
Opened in Galveston, right across from the library, 2219 Sealy. And I just found a little building. It was not a medical clinic. And I had a friend through one of the yayas that was a carpenter. And he and I sort of framed out this place in a real estate building. And that's where my office was. My mother and father-in-law were from Galveston. And also my brother-in-law was a longshoreman. And the longshoremen started coming to see me. And they had very good insurance standards. You wouldn't believe I was charging, $10 to $15 for a first visit and $7 for the visit after that. You didn't have to have that much money to live, at that time. But after about a year, I was making, very comfortable living.
How long did you run that practice there in Galveston on Sealy?
From 1972 to 1977. And I was drawing my own blood, doing my throat smears, but I'd send them off to a lab, and I'd have to wait for the results to come back. Or if I needed something stat, it would go out to the St. Mary's laboratory. All my x-rays had to be done in the Seeley Smith Professional Building, where there was a radiology group where they would do the x-rays and then give you the results back over the phone. There was another medical clinic that was on 39th Street, and it had the availability of lab, x-ray, and if I rented there, then I could use the laboratory and they would give me some return on the laboratory fees, x-rays, and physical therapy. And that was actually a big financial reward by moving there. From 77 till probably the early 1990s, I was there at that particular clinic. At that time, managed care was coming in, and UTMB was looking to buy up the practices of the family doctors in town. With the arrangements they were giving me, it wasn't financially good to my, and so I moved to a location out more on the west part of the island, and that was about early 1990s. And then in late 1990s or right around 2000, there were groups that were putting doctors together, by some association. So I was associated with people from the mainland, which is Lamarck and Texas City area, and even Clear Lake. And it was called Gulf Coast Medical Group. You worked with other doctors to try it. I don't know what the whole theory was, that they were going to streamline, care and stuff like that. And it just dwindled and dwindled till I couldn't do it anymore. In 2004, I quit. I just told them I'm leaving. The other thing that came up was they wanted to build a hospital about that time. And I was into giving a service. I was not into wanting to manage a hospital and the cost and expense. And that's probably what broke the back of it. I had a KEO plan, and it had done very well, but it was not going to sustain me, from being 61 till 85 with what the charts say or whatever. So I tried to do a little bit of locum tenens, which meant I'd sign on with a group that would place doctors where doctors were going to be out of town or ill or on vacation or whatever. And
substitute doctoring.
Yeah, substitute doctoring. And but the jobs would come inconsistently. After about 6 months, my daughter could see that I was unhappy, and she was reading an advertisement for a doctor for the campus up here at A&M, Texas A&M. I figured, the salary wasn't big in Thompson at that time, but I said, during the summer, I could even do some locums if I wanted to do that. And we could live up here and then during the summer go back to Galveston. So I did that from 2004 till we sold our house in about 2016. So about 10 to 12 years, we had two residences at that time. It was fun, the most fun time in medicine I had. There was enough workers there to do your referrals for you, where you didn't have to individually do it, nor have to get an okay from an insurance company to get it done. You were off the holidays. Who can leave a practice for 3 months and then come back and have the same load after that?
What is the day-to-day of a Texas A&M doctor? What is that? What do you do?
I would say the majority of them are writing class notes for them to get back in. And you can smell the alcohol and stuff when they come in, I mean, it just was, it was almost comical. You know, I'm being paid this to take care of these kids, but it was a good position, and there are a couple of things that were just so funny. I had a kid that came in to see me for a cough, and so I take a history of a cough, you know, how long you've been sick, all of these things, and get to the point where now I'm going to examine him. Well, he's got a CCA shirt on, okay? It has a flounder, speckled trout, and a redfish on it. So I pull it up and start listening to his lungs and ask him the question, are you a saltwater fisherman? And he says, you can tell that by listening to my lungs. Now that's a good Aggie story. A student comes in, the same student, maybe 3 or 4 months before she had come in, and she had sprained her ankle, and she was in flip-flops, okay? Flip-flops and thongs, in my generation, they were about the same thing. So she comes in for her next visit, but this time she's got a anal problem. She's got a hemorrhoid. The nurse gets her prepped and everything like that, and she says, but doctor, I will tell you, I quit wearing flip-flops. No, thongs. I quit wearing thongs. And I'm seeing my last note, and I'm seeing in there, and I go in there, and what she's calling thongs is what I'm calling the flip-flop. Man, it was. I couldn't hardly quit from laughing, you know. And then it wasn't my patient, but there was a female that came in just in gruesome pain, and the doctor comes out of the room, said, she's in labor. There was a student that either through denial or something came in, and she was in labor and not having abdominal pain. I had a young lady that came in for a sore throat, and, you know, feeling the neck, I felt like her thyroid was enlarged in a nodule. I said, and it was around, you know, exam time, and I told her, I said, you need, when you get back to Austin, to tell your parents to take you to an endocrinologist. Maybe a year or 2 years later, she came back in, she has a scar, and I said, well, what is this from? She said, well, the doctor who you said to go to said to thank you for saving the cancer. It was a pre-malignant nodule. That was rewarding. Then there's things that are not rewarding. When you see a kid, he comes in with a cough, you do a chest x-ray, and he's got an infiltrate, and it ended up being lymphoma. We saw a lot of lymphoma in that particular. So the rewarding thing was still, I was able to be a good clinician in a university setting. One time, you know, we allowed a lot of walk-in people, and they put in a kid with a sore throat. Well, he did have a sore throat, but he also had a sore neck. I asked him what was wrong, you know, with his. He said, well, I fell down the steps. And he ended up having a fracture of a cervical vertebra. And, you know, so you could never just take things for granted, you know. People come see me, they just like my care, you know. I'd get thank you notes for me taking care of kids with allergies. Well, you know, she said, I just want to tell you how much, you know. And I mean, I'd have very good personal relationship with these. That was very meaningful, you know. Even though I wouldn't, some of the people that go see other doctors, there were people that just would come back and see me. I had one little girl that had mono, and she was really sick, and it was finals time. And so I said, look, we're going to get you through finals, but it's going to be necessary for you to take some steroids. She had finals, and I think I wanted her to come back and see me the next day. She didn't come back and she got better, but her mother called me. She was a vet in Fort Worth. I'd called her daughter. She said, I just want to talk to a doctor who would call her patient back and not have to call them. It was that was really a rewarding time for me. She was a vet in Fort Worth, but to think that meant so much to a parent.
Let's get you retired. Again, I don't know why you left because you seem to love it.
Well, that's when my kidneys started failing. The first thing that happened was I went into atrial fibrillation, and I had 3 ablations. Each time it took a little bit more of a toll, and then my kidney function started going up, and I was just really not feeling well. And then I started in January of 2017, I had an episode where I got short of breath, and I went to the emergency room, and I was put in, and they established a diagnosis of congestive heart failure, maybe pneumonia. And I just really was never right after that. Each time I'd go back to the nephrologist and check my renal functions, they were going up. So 2017, I called it quits. And then at the end in December, they knew I was going to have to go on dialysis. So since 2018, January, I've been on dialysis. I'd still be doing it, and I still think people still call me for care. I have friends of my son. One of them had gone to their doctor and had got a prescription for Cipro hydrocortisone. They didn't have any insurance, and it was going to cost them $225. He said, "Can you possibly give me something different, than this?" Well, cortisporin, which is neomycin, and with hydrocortisone, cost them $25, and it cleared up the swimmer's ear that the kid had, and not having to go to medicine has got out of financial control. I've always been a big advocate of hospice. That is a service that is underutilized, and not specifically for people on dialysis, but other things, and they do such a good job. They give you so much social, mental support, and it puts the family at ease and a good peace of mind to be where there's going to be a good separation. So I'm not compromised with diabetes. I'm not compromised with a bad heart. It's just years of, I guess, high blood pressure. And, when I had that chemotherapy in 1980, they don't know what that did to my kidneys. I had that property in Galveston at 7 acres, and along the fence line, I put out so much of that spray to kill the weeds underneath the fence line.
Roundup?
Yeah, and Roundup, yeah. And so, I don't know. I had a mole on my left lower chest, and my wife said, you really ought to get that off. And we were at the beach, and my kids were on floats, and something came and pecked, like a fish came and pecked at it. I don't know whether, I said, well, maybe I ought to get this thing, looked at. And I went in, and they excised it, and it was a melanoma. It was done in May and June of 1980. And in melanomas, the aggressiveness is placed on how much depth it penetrates to. And so mine was, and they have had different grading system on melanomas in the past, and mine was of one that was a little bit significant. So the surgeon, he did the proper resection of it when at the time of him doing the biopsy. Then he said, well, you really probably need to go talk with a oncologist. And Dr. John Costanzi was at UTMB at that time. And he said, look, you'd have to have your nodes taken out of your groin and out of your arm. Why don't we just give you a year of chemotherapy? And that's where we started with that. So during that period of time from June of 1980 to 1981, I would have chemotherapy for 1 week each month. And very fortunate, I didn't miss any time from work after maybe a month where I'd go to the cancer center and get the IV started and stuff, because there was in my office building where I was at, one of the nurses was a chemotherapy nurse before that, and she'd come in and start my IV, and then my wife, who is a RN, she would add the different chemicals. I had to have 2 different ones to take. And the first 2 days I was very sick at nighttime with just nausea and vomiting. Then I'd go back to work. I'd even get up, and go to the hospital. I'd always make my rounds at the hospital before going to the office. And I did that and didn't skip a beat. All that period of time, I'm thinking, well, how much time do I have left? Because I knew what melanoma is like, and the survival rate back in the 80s was not as good as it is now. I was very leery during that period of time. I was feeling my armpits and feeling my groins to see if there were any nodules showing up. And after for the 1 year, and then the doctor will follow you every 3 or 4 months, and then it'd be every year. And so it's been, since 1980, so it's 40 years. We're see, 1980, Gabe was born in 73. So he was playing soccer in that particular age group. And then when you're an 8-year-old, you can turn into to the minor league of baseball. So I must have started coaching Little League somewhere. Let's see, he was, so 1983, that would put him at 10. I was probably coaching him in Little League during that period of time, about by 1983, 84. And then Ben's 76, so 86 is really when he would have been in the Little League, and those were our priorities in our life. There were certain things that we were going to do for our kids, and not only the Little League, and I had some pretty good teams. That I had 1 or 2 players that played for University of Texas, and I think I coached Brandon Backey. Brandon Backey was a pitcher for the Astros, actually pitched in pretty well in the World Series. And Ben is also an excellent fisherman. I mean, the kid catches fish. I don't care whether inshore or offshore, and he knows the hot spots, and he will not give up where he goes to catch them. There was one cute thing that happened when I was on the minor league team. I had the Cubs. And so you had a big C, and then you have UBS. And one of my little minor league said, Coach, I just have one question for you. What does that UBS stand for? It was comical, but my father-in-law, we did the minor league, then we moved up to the regular little league. But we'd have some good competition. I just said, these are my kids. These are my investment in life. I was president of the PTO at their elementary school for 1 or 2 years. At the church, I was, and this was all in the 80s. I did Sunday school teach the second, third, and fourth graders for about a year, and then I even sang in the choir. I was sang in the choir. It just I like music so much, and some of the hymns are just they just stay with you. We lived right off of it's still west. It would be around the area of 69th Street in a subdivision called Gulf Village, and it was a very nice neighborhood. Kids had wonderful friends in that neighborhood. It was just really a great time. With there actually, I'm thinking of the 80s, 83, there was a Hurricane Alicia came through, and we stayed there on the island. We lost electricity for about a week or so, 4 or 5 days, and but it was something to say, well, you went through a hurricane, you know.
And then your wife finds this property.
Yeah, but she had maybe bought that in the late 70s. She likes isolation, you know. Nobody, she didn't want to be, she just is appalled with the way houses are built so close together right now. And she bought this acreage, and it was, I think she bought it very reasonable at the time. We had been living there, and she wanted to build a new house, and so it was nothing but briar bush and stuff like that. And I had this Mr. Kayla who was from Bolivar. I asked him if he could clear it, and he said, "Well, come and let me come out there and look at it." He said, "Doc, you need a fire." He's you know, I guess in Bolivar they'd just burn the property. But he came over with a big drag line, dug me a nice little tank out, and cleared the land. And then he needed to move his machinery, because I think that may have been when Alicia was coming in. But then they started building the place in '83, and it was a beautiful, and they had so many different events. You know, Ben's wedding, he and Heather's wedding, were on the front steps of that house. The reception was just in the backyard. It was a neat setup. We had so many gatherings, and it was a big 5-bedroom, 4-bath house, and had such beautiful scenes. And then I could tell the different seasons. It'd be February, you'd see the sandhill cranes, they'd be right around our house. And then the blue-winged teal would come into the pond and around February. And then I had I think around the start of the summer or in the spring, there was this little bird. It's a red bird. It's a Mexican flycatcher, but it would always show up about the same time of the year, almost similar to the way my hummingbirds come in at the year. I tell you that this year, the birds will come up, the hummingbird will come to my garage and let me know that they're here. I mean, my feeder's not out, and I've had 2 years where it'll buzz around and letting them know that it lets me know that they're back in the territory. This September, I had 10 birds on a feeder. It was, I guess they were, it was like an eating frenzy, but they were only here for a day or two, and then they were gone. So they must have been going north or south or whatever they're doing. But I just love the hummingbird. So Jill was always like a vibrant girl, pretty girl, very sensitive, and I hate to do negative things, but this is what I can remember her as in her high school years. Her teacher said, "You could be such a good student, but you talk too much." I said, "Ms. Lindeman, my office is 4 blocks from from the Ball High School. I said, if you're having a problem, you call me. So one day she called me. I said, well, I'm on my way over there. I'll be there in about 10 or 15 minutes. And Jill got on the phone, said, Dad, please don't come. That was the first thing. And I think the next thing was when she, I didn't know what it was going to be, how it was going to be so emotional to drop her off here at Texas A&M. And my wife and I both cried all the way to Hempstead after we had dropped her off from here at A&M. The thing about Gabe is he gave us so many good memories playing baseball and football at Ball High. He played on a team that generally in football was predominantly black, got along great with them, played very good baseball. And then after college, had a difficult in making his plan for the future, but he was applying to physical therapy school. First year didn't get in. Second year he did get in, and it sort of reminded me of my pathway but whenever he set out to do something, he'd do it. Ben, there's so many things I can say about him, but I think it's always been, gosh, he's just a real people person. One of the things I was sort of proud of him was he was going to middle school, and it was in the bathroom, and one of the kids had forced this other kid that was not a real when resisting. He wanted his money, and Ben said, "You ain't taking the guy's money." The boy gave it back to him. I think he could have asserted himself. He was our only kid to finish college in 4 years. He went to Shriners, and to my wife's really looking into what to do for kids with dyslexia, she found the schools that would give kids one-on-one tutoring. He could have his books on tape, and Shriner gave him an excellent education. And then he was very independent. He went to work in South Bend, Indiana. It was too cold. He came back here and he opened up a business, the Gulfside Cleaning, which has been a very successful business and been its most successful year here in 2020. And that's hard to believe. I couldn't always be at home, and she wanted to be a stay-at-home mom. And to this day, I think that's very critical in our society today, is have a stay-at-home mom. She was very religiously involved. She was in Bible Study Fellowship, which is termed BSF, for many years. She was not the main teaching leader, but had her classes. She's a great dancer. Very important to me. We have danced all out our lives, and I think the most memorable thing with Terry was we were in New Orleans one time, and we drink and we dance. And so we go down Bourbon Street. At every place, we made it a point to dance in the places we're playing music. And on our way home, going the other way, we stopped in this one place and we were dancing. And there was this man that was having his bachelor party there. He says, "I want to buy y'all a drink." He said, "I want to be like y'all when I'm married." In addition, he gave us $20. He said, "I cannot." He said, "I want to be too much like y'all." And that was it's sort of a highlight of our dancing career, So we're pretty much homebodies. We watch the same TV shows every week, NCIS and Blue Bloods and FBI. We'll sit around here, have Alexa play music, and it's so random. It may be Mickey Gilley, it could be Dionne Warwick, it could be the Righteous Brothers. I mean, and we'll sometimes dance here in the kitchen. She's always saying, when are we going to dance again? Go out and dance. But there's nothing but country and western, and it's not our favorite dance. You give us rock and roll and rhythm and blues, and we can go. We've both grown a little bit older, maybe not as athletic, because we both like to play golf and tennis, but we can't really hardly do that anymore. And Mac, he's probably the most sensitive kid of all. The thing that was very memorable to me is when I retired, I got a note from one of my doctor friends there in the building. She wanted to send me a retirement note, but she wanted to let me know how important Mac had come to see her as a patient, how he was just so complimentary of me. He said, it's one thing to see it from just general population, but to see it from a grandson was important. Then Sam is probably the quietest of my grandkids. He's now track star at Texas A&M. And one of the paintings out there was a painting of me when I was in the hospital with a bypass surgery in 2009. And he sent that to me at my hospital room, which I thought was real memorable. Zoe was the little Czech queen. I saw a little article in the paper looking for girls of Czech descent to run in the Czech Queens contest. And I gave it to her. And I didn't think she'd do it, but she did it, and she was the 2019-2020 Czech Queen. Abby, she's very, very sweet. She gave us a little book that she had to do for class. That she you can tell she's sensitive. Both of them, both Zoe and Abby, are very gifted from the art standpoint. She was the one who did the hummingbird painting. She is now on the volleyball team here, and we've seen between Zoe and Abby so many volleyball games all in this area. She had just recently advanced to the regionals with her team, and she got knocked out by the Fulcher team that was playing in the state finals of volleyball. Yeah, and then Towns, he seemed like going to be the good all-rounded person. He fishes with his dad. He plays the guitar. He does real good in school, and he's really very personable, like his dad. And William H. Peterek, the youngest, he's 5 now, and he is great fisherman. They recently had sent us a video where he is catching a flounder, and it's such a cute little video of him just struggling to get this 3 or 4 flounder in. And
sounds like you enjoy being a granddad.
Yeah, they like, because they love to come eat breakfast here, and they're bacon lovers and pancake lovers.
So how does one become a Santa Claus?
How does one become a Santa Claus? Well, our church needed a Santa Claus to go to the Seaman Center, because it's a port city, and we have a Seaman Center that the church was responsible for, and they need a Santa Claus, and that's how it started. It would have been the early 1980s. It evolved into more than just that particular event. I did it for the church, and then I think that started the next year doing it at the Hollins house. Benny and Peggy, they would always have Christmas Eve there, and there would be an exchange of gifts. I would do it there, and then after a couple of drinks or so, I would go and visit some of my older patients. Yeah, that was fun. It really was fun. I had they were mainly in their 80s and or 70s or 80s, and then our neighborhood. I would go by our neighbors. There were a family called the Cromers. They would always have it. They would know Dr. Bill was coming by to be Santa. Around the corner there was PJ Pucciarella. He never knew how. However, he had a brain tumor, and he said, "I know you." Yeah, and for the longest he never knew. I was driving down the street, going into the Cromers, and the street over, a lady says, "Would you come to our house?" And she didn't know who I was, but I went in, and they happened to be friends or patients of mine. I try to specifically go to my older patients. I also went to another neighbor, Bob Ford, and I'd always have him sit on my lap. I said, "I want old Stooge to come sit on my lap." They thought it was the cutest thing, the Ford family. Each year I would do it, and they knew who I was, and I thought that my little granddaughter Zoe didn't know who it was, and she one time she had Susu, that's what they call grandma, and of course I said, "Now, Susu, you know, and I know that Papa is Santa Claus." So that was sort of comical, but it really was a way for me to hide myself. I knew enough about each kid to make it a real personable event, and whether it was grandkids or Benny's great grandkids, I got to hold them all and had a good time at Christmas. I mean, I really enjoyed that particular aspect of it.
How did you get to know Bill Cherry, and why in the heck did he write about you?
That's very interesting. And it probably was my approach to medicine, because my first contact with Bill Cherry was he brought in his mother, who probably was in maybe her mid-80s. And she said he brought her in because the doctor that he was going to always wanted her to come in every year to refill her thyroid. Bill Cherry told me, he said, half the time she's not even taking the medicine. She doesn't like the idea of taking the medicine. And being 84 and being on thyroid replacement, I don't know how much important it was. I said, "Well, why do you want to even give it to her anyway?" And I guess he just liked my practical approach to medicine. I guess he had heard about the way I was in the community, perhaps being a Little League coach and being Santa Claus. I think there was one thing that he had heard from one of his friends, that I'd go play Santa Claus, and that I'd actually work longshore. When I was in medical school, between some breaks, you could go work longshore as I forget what, casual. You were a casual. If all of the other union members got hired, and they still were looking for one. So I worked a couple of days in the hold of a ship and found out that was hard work.
Did he write 2 stories on you?
I think he wrote the one about me, and then he wrote the one on legacy at the end. After he wrote the one in the newspaper, he wrote he had it put in Texas Escapes magazine. He would occasionally put in some little articles about me. Mr. Peacock, he went to our church.
The ranch, you show me the picture, and you've talked to me in passing a little bit, but tell me the significance of...
Well, this really started with the Yayas, and the wife of the owner, or the owner's family of this ranch, was Vicky Tavener Giles. She was a Yaya. Indirectly, Vicky said, "Why don't we all get together up here at the ranch?"
What's the name of it?
The Hillingdon Ranch. If you type in Hillingdon Ranch, it tells about how this Palmer Giles, or Alfred Giles, he was an attorney from San Antonio that bought this property. So every year, starting in 1972 to probably 2010, there have been some type of reunion that they've held it for every year. Vicki passed away probably late 1980s or 90s from a brain tumor, but her husband, Robin Giles, who still operates the ranch with his son, remarried. You have to get this straight now. One of the Yayas set up Robin with one of her friends from Alvin, and they married. And we have continued this tradition. Gosh, there were so many conversations and interactions. I mean, it was just a lot of talk and drink, you know, up there at that time. But it's an unforgettable experience. And it not only was us, but then our children that went there, and then grandchildren that were able to experience that. I've got a lot to be thankful for. I am so comfortable with the situation I am with the Lord that I think I've left it up to Him on giving me a direction right there. And I do think that it was the Lord that gave me my life the way it was, meeting Terry. He put me in the right profession. A lot of memories. Gosh, I just, it's been perfect, okay?